As you just heard, this webinar is being recorded, and I will share more information on that in just a few moments. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Alrighty, well, we are at noon, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. Thank you very much for joining us. Your Hour with APA Virginia is sponsored by the Berkeley Group. We are so grateful for their support. Today we have Julie Bolthouse of the Piedmont Environmental Council joining us to discuss planning for the infrastructure of the digital age. The CM number for this webinar is listed here, and I will also be sharing that along with other helpful information in the chat box shortly. This is our website. I will also share the link to this in the chat, where you can find helpful information, updates on the webinar series, and you can access helpful links like links to our YouTube channel where you can watch previously recorded webinars there as well. So we really do encourage questions, but please use the Q&A box to help Julie keep track of all inquiries versus the chat box. But you can also use the chat box if you have any logistical questions for me. You can also use the raise hand feature if you would like to be unmuted. It's a request to be unmuted, so that would be primarily for the Q&A portion at the end. I am going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen and hand over the screen sharing to Julie, but while we transition, I am going to introduce Julie a little bit further. Alrighty, Julie is the Director of Land Use at Piedmont Environmental Council, where she has worked for 12 years. Julie manages 9 field staff that work on land use issues in Clark, Loudoun, Rappahannock, Fauquier, Culpeper, Orange, Madison, Greene, and Albemarle counties. Their organizational mission is to protect and restore the lands and waters of the Virginia Piedmont while building stronger, more sustainable communities. Julie advocates for thoughtful policy and planning that promotes a sustainable future and protects the natural resources, local food system, history, and beauty of the Virginia Piedmont. She strives to engage and empower residents in the decision-making processes that affect them. Her broad background helps her see issues in a holistic way. Through research and analysis, Julie adds background, context, and data to discussions on complex issues. Built on that information, Julie works with residents to form coalitions, establish action plans, and achieve positive outcomes. During her years of advocacy, she has reviewed and commented on numerous land use proposals at the local, state, and federal level on issues including environmental planning, affordable housing, historic preservation, rural planning, land conservation, and now data centers and energy planning. She has a passion for investigating planning topics and sharing information with the public in a succinct and easy way to understand. Julie has held dozens of public workshops and town halls on various topics, including sustainable landscaping workshops, capturing the rain workshop on green infrastructure options for HOAs, and solar on the farm workshop about integrating solar farming into operation. Julie also organized a number of planning workshops in collaboration with the Rappahannock-Rapidan Regional Commission and the Northern Virginia Regional Commission, including integrating dark sky standards into local zoning ordinances, shedding a light on solar, managing fill dirt and debris disposal in rural areas, and the Creating Walkable Piedmont Communities workshop. Every year, PEC holds a summer fellowship program for college students, and she coordinates and teaches a program on land use. Data center development and energy usage has been the hot topic for the last 2 years, and she has found that there are a few people who know much about the topic, those that tend to only have expertise on a portion. Julie has found herself having to become the expert on the issue by pulling the various pieces of information from each field. Julie states that while she is not an expert on data center development or energy, she is very knowledgeable about the land use impacts of the trends that are currently taking place. So Julie has a lot of experience in this field that is a very pressing topic. So I think we have a great webinar ahead of us. I'm going to pass it over to Julie, and keep your eyes peeled on the chat box for helpful information and links in the coming minutes. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much for that really gracious introduction. Welcome. I'm Julie Bolthouse, Director of Land Use with Piedmont Environmental Council. Our organization is a 501c3 formed in 1972. Our mission is to protect and restore the lands and waters of the Virginia Piedmont while building stronger, more sustainable communities. We've taken the lead on researching and raising awareness about explosive data center development in Virginia because over the last 2 years, proposals have threatened everything we work to protect: land conservation, water protection, historic resource protection, air quality, energy sustainability, and climate change resilience, and quality of life in communities. However, the presentation that I have put together for you today is an informational piece and does not really go into the advocacy side in depth. If you want the advocacy piece, you want to know more about how these trends are impacting Virginia's conservation goals and climate initiatives and what solutions we are suggesting at the state level, I encourage you to check out our website at pecva.org or contact me for more information. I've crammed a lot in here, so let's go ahead and get started. Before we talk about planning for the digital age, we need to understand what I mean by the digital age. The digital age is the electrification of the 21st century. Each time we click a button on our devices, data centers full of computer servers connected by fiber and fueled by electricity store and process that data. Our devices are able to stay small while our computing power increases exponentially because the processing and data storage is increasingly not taking place in your device, but in a data center. Your device is the means of accessing it. It's basically a speaker, microphone, battery, and touchpad. Everything else is going on and taking place at a data center. Because of this disconnect, many do not see or understand the impact on the digital age on the landscape. However, as computing needs continue to grow at an explosive rate, especially with soaring demand for artificial intelligence, data harvesting, and cryptocurrency mining, the impact on the ground is becoming more visible and impactful. And I just want to make sure, just because my screen is doing something funny here, you guys are seeing a screen that says the digital age, right?
Yes.
It has a, okay, good. I wasn't sure if the slides were actually moving because it's not showing the green box like it usually does. Sorry. So as planners, I think it's really important and it's our responsibility to adapt to this new age and try to incorporate this into our planning. Sorry, now my computer's doing something really funny. There we go. It's important for us to incorporate this into our planning. This is a brave new world. This is a new topic for us, but we've got to take on the challenge, especially here in Virginia, and address these energy planning challenges. So Northern Virginia, specifically Loudoun, boasts the largest data center market in the world. This is a slide from Dominion Energy presented during their quarterly update to shareholders, explaining why Northern Virginia's data center market is so attractive and why it will grow, continue to grow, and require accompanying growth of the energy infrastructure. As you can see, robust fiber networks, affordable energy, and attractive business climate are key factors driving the continued growth of this huge market. Data centers are at the core of the digital age, but before we can get into the details about data centers themselves, let's talk about the infrastructure that connects and powers data centers. As planners, we don't often think of infrastructure as part of land use. Fiber and electricity is secondary infrastructure that will be provided as necessary in the communities that we plan. However, the booming data center market has changed the nature and role of this infrastructure. Planners who fail to incorporate it into their early planning and zoning decisions do so at their own risk. The quote here is from the outgoing Deputy County Administrator, Charles Yudd. He stated that the next big planning challenge for Loudoun won't be land use, but infrastructure, especially energy infrastructure. What we've seen in Loudoun is that infrastructure is no longer a secondary aspect of our communities, but is driving growth pressure and land values and land uses. The provision of large amounts of power to data centers is becoming oh gosh, I'm sorry, is becoming, sorry, I have an issue where there we go. Is becoming a challenge for our communities. He there's a quote from him that was recently in the newspaper where he stated that the next big planning challenge for Loudoun won't be land use, but infrastructure, especially energy infrastructure. What we've seen in Loudoun is that infrastructure is no longer a secondary aspect of our communities, but is now driving growth pressure in land values and also the land uses. The provision of large amounts of power to data centers is increasingly destroying community resources and cutting through residential areas. But first, let's discuss fiber. Fiber is what connects your device to data centers, either through direct fiber connections or through telecommunication towers. Wi-Fi, satellite, DSL, etc., all are connected to it. Those communications enter a web of fiber across the globe and go to data centers to be processed. There are numerous fiber providers, but they generally fit into three categories: internet content providers with dedicated lines, service providers that consumers are most familiar with, and dark fiber providers that lease fiber to companies to create private high-speed networks. But these are only the terrestrial fiber lines. There's also numerous submarine fiber lines that move data across the globe. 4 of those transoceanic fiber connection cables connect into terrestrial lines at Virginia Beach. A couple of them are known by data center companies, are owned by data center companies, Google, Microsoft, and Facebook. Now let's talk about what fuels these data centers: electricity. Transmission lines are large power lines that carry high voltage, that's 138 kilovolts or higher, for long distances from the generating power stations to substations. Substations change the voltage of the electricity using transformers. Distribution lines carry the usable voltage for shorter distances from the substation to the consumer. Think of the grid as our road system. Transmission lines are the interstates, substations are the exits, and distribution lines are the secondary roads to homes and businesses. Data centers are different than most businesses, though. They usually need direct lines off one of these exits due to the large amount of electricity that they require and the need for reliable power, because transmission lines are much less susceptible to outages than distribution lines. Data centers use a lot of electricity, 24/7. And although data centers are more energy efficient than their on-site IT infrastructure that they've replaced, the demand for data and processing has grown explosively, and they are actually using more power than ever before. The convenience and cost savings of using offsite data centers has increased consumption dramatically. 5 years ago, data center buildings used between 10 to 30 megawatts. Last year, Dominion was saying they were receiving requests for 30 to 60 megawatts per building. Now they're saying that requests are between 60 and 90 megawatts per building. A single megawatt serves approximately 250 houses at peak load. That means that a 60 megawatt data center building uses as much as 15,000 households. As we continue to build campuses with dozens of data center buildings, those power needs need to come from somewhere. So the data centers being approved today are driving the transmission lines and power generation that needs to be built tomorrow. Unless the market, policy, or technology changes drastically, every indication is that power consumption is going to go up, not down. This is a recent article from Penn Today, a news publication out of the University of Pennsylvania. It is an interview with professors from the School of Engineering and Applied Sciences. Professor Girawali stated, "We take it for granted, but all the tasks our machines perform are transactions between memory and processors, and each of these transactions requires energy. As these tasks become more elaborate and data intensive, 2 things begin to scale up exponentially: the need for more memory storage and the need for more energy. In 2018, our computers consumed roughly 1 to 2% of the global electricity supply. If we continue at this rate by 2030, it's projected to rise between 8 to 21%, further exacerbating the current energy crisis." So who's planning and ensuring reliability of the grid? Our regional transmission operator, PJM. They operate the competitive wholesale electricity market and manage the high voltage electricity grid to ensure reliability for the entire area. Our electric utilities operate within the PJM area. You can see, Dominion in there in pink, and all our other utilities shown on the map. Within this structure, there are standards used by PJM and each utility to plan for power transmission. These general standards are important for localities to understand and reference when evaluating data center proposals. All utilities must meet PJM standards, but each utility uses its own set of standards. Dominion's here, these are their standards. They have a substation is limited to 300 megawatts. Generally, only a 230 kV and below can be used to serve local load requests. Tapping into a 500 kV, for example, with a new substation is typically only done to resolve system level issues, not to serve a user like a data center. The State Corporation Commission provides regulation of electric facilities. A CPCN, which is a certificate of convenience and public necessity, is required for most lines over 138 kilovolts and those placed underground or in a navigable waterway. Local governments only regulate siting, zoning, and site plan of substations. That's it. Rough estimates of what lines can carry, it varies based on conductor and conditions and that sort of thing. But generally, a 230 can carry 1 to 1.6 gigawatts, and a 500 kV can carry between 4.3 and 5.2 gigawatts. However, a single transmission line is generally limited to serving no more than 100 megawatts without redundancy for reliability purposes. Dominion requires additional reinforcements when loads exceed 300 megawatts. So what they call that is an N-1-1 contingency, which means the simultaneous loss of two major units. And that applies to both line loss and substation loss. So what that means is you need to have two lines if it's over 100 megawatts, and you potentially need to have 3 redundancies built in if you have a load over 300 megawatts. This information gives a locality an idea of what infrastructure will be needed to meet large load demands of data centers. But there's a lot more nuance and detail to these standards. So the locality should also request a meeting with the utility to discuss the infrastructure needs of the proposal prior to approving them. Now that we've discussed the infrastructure that serves the data center, let's talk about the data center itself. The data center is a facility that processes, manages, and stores data. The building is usually concrete construction with little or no windows, with aisles full of racks that are loaded with computer servers that are storing and processing data. That equipment gets very hot, so a major component of any data center is the cooling system, which can vary in its design. To ensure redundancy, data centers include backup generators, which are usually diesel, which can be seen lined up in this picture behind the building. And they also store fuel on site to ensure a certain amount of runtime in the case of a power outage, which can be seen on the other side of the building. You can see the fuel tanks lined up here on the other side of the building. Usually they have a high level of security, which includes a guard station and fencing. Lighting can be just along the building or also along the gate. Size of the facilities can vary, but the average has been increasing, and it's not uncommon to see a 200,000 square foot data center building. The height is usually between 40 to 90 feet, but that has also been increasing up to 120 feet or even taller in dense areas. And campus sizes vary, but it's not uncommon to see proposals for 6 or more buildings, especially in rural areas. Generally, there's 4 types of data centers. Each has a different impact on the ground. The one that makes up most of the market share is hyperscale cloud data centers, such as Amazon, Microsoft, and Google, which host data processing and applications off premises. Co-location facilities provide building, cooling, bandwidth, security, etc., while other companies rent space within and provide and manage their own IT components. They make up the largest number of companies and include names like Digital Realty, QTS, and Iron Mountain. Enterprise data centers are built to own and operated by companies and are optimized for that end user. And examples include groups like Facebook or banks. Bitcoin miner data centers are dedicated to cryptocurrency and use even more power than a normal data center. A single Bitcoin transaction can use as much as an average US household over 48 days. Their construction tends to be cheaper and they often produce much more noise. Rural locations with lower land costs tend to be more attractive to cryptocurrency data centers. So what is a hyperscale data center? There is not really a single definition for hyperscale data centers, but generally they are much larger and take advantage of economies of scale and custom engineering. For this reason, they significantly outperform smaller data centers. Any of the four types of data centers mentioned can be hyperscale. They're sort of like the big box store of the data center world. The vast majority of data center proposals are now what I would consider hyperscale. Edge data centers are another term that you may have heard. They are small data centers located closer to end users and devices, and they deliver cached content and cloud computing closer to consumers so that the applications and services that they perform are faster and more secure. They usually are tied to a larger network of data centers with a large core data center campus. Edge data centers are all the buzz, but we're not seeing many land use proposals for them in our region. So it doesn't seem like there is a huge market for them in Virginia at this point. So what does the data center market look like in Virginia? This is a map from the Virginia Economic Development Department showing all the different data center companies that are located here in Virginia. And as you can see, there's a lot. Polling information from CBRE, that's a worldwide commercial real estate service and investment company. I'm going to go over where Virginia market stands in terms of the global data center market. This is a map of the major data center markets in the world. As you can see, there are ones on every continent with 6 in the US. This graph shows the current data center inventory of the 16 largest data center markets in the world. The North American markets only include wholesale co-location facilities, while the others include both wholesale and retail co-location facilities, and neither includes cloud or enterprise data centers. But this gives you a good idea of just how much larger Northern Virginia's market is than the rest of the markets. And the missing data, just so you understand, would only increase the lead of the Northern Virginia market. This shows the net absorption of data center capacity from the first quarter of 2022 to the first quarter of 2023. Again, it is only looking at wholesale co-location facilities for North America, but it gives you an idea of how much faster the Northern Virginia market is growing than any other data center market. This shows the percentage of vacancy, and as you can see, Northern Virginia remains highly competitive and there is very little vacancy in this market. And part of the reason for that is, it might be at least the low monthly price the Northern Virginia market has been able to maintain compared to other markets like Silicon Valley. And this does not include the electricity costs, which are also very low in the Dominion Energy territory. But that's the current Northern Virginia data center market. What about the rest of Virginia? What's going on? I have made a rough list of data center approvals and applications that have been submitted to some of the counties within PEC's region and in close proximity. This is not a comprehensive list of all the applications and approved data center development within the state or even within these counties. It doesn't include, for example, by right data center development in Loudoun or Prince William. It also doesn't include other counties that have applications that I haven't had a chance to really dig into, like Fairfax, Leesburg, Henrico, Surrey, Mecklenburg. But it clearly demonstrates that the market is still booming and expanding into more rural parts of the state. And for those of you who are trying to add up all that in your head, there are over 30 million square feet of approved data center space requiring an estimated 4 to 13 gigawatts of power. With all the applications, it's actually over 100 million square feet, somewhere between 15 and 47 gigawatts of power. Obviously, it's not going to all be approved, and some of the approved applications may never even move forward, but that amount of power would require massive increases in power generation. Even a fraction of that amount of power would require infrastructure expansion and upgrades to the electric grid. And in fact, this is exactly what Dominion is projecting in terms of load growth in Virginia. But if you're interested in learning more about PJM and Dominion's load forecasts and plans for massive transmission line and power generation expansion in Virginia and beyond, please check out our webpage, because I'm not going to go into depth on that. That's a whole nother presentation. Why are localities so interested in data center development? Well, they have some very attractive aspects. They generally don't usually create a lot of traffic. They don't require school seats. They create some jobs, although the employment density is actually pretty low. They offer a lot of tax revenue, though. Personal property tax on IT equipment is the main source of revenue, and then also the real estate tax. So in Loudoun Now recently, the vice mayor of Leesburg, Neil Steinberg, was quoted explaining his recent decision on data centers. In the end, it is all about the money, and it is a lot of money. And he's not alone. He's not a bad guy. I know him. He's a great guy. But that is the primary reason I've heard from all elected officials that have supported these data center proposals. So, okay, now let's talk about land use impacts of data centers. There are a variety of local land use impacts from data centers, which vary based on the type of data center, the type of computing, and the type of cooling technology that they're using. Traffic is generally low, but it varies based on the type of data center facility. So an enterprise or co-location data center with office space or customers going in and out regularly, like Digital Gateway here on the slide, will have more traffic than a cloud data center on the right. So it's important to know what type of data center you're dealing with and use the appropriate modeling when you're doing your TIA or traffic impact analysis. The size of these facilities and industrial nature and the energy infrastructure that they require can make them extremely impactful on neighbors or adjacent land uses. So some other things to think about when determining where data centers should or should not be located is their size, fencing, security that can hinder connectivity within the community. Another is that approvals in areas where there is vacant or underutilized land can lead to land speculation and can raise surrounding land prices and trigger rezonings of residential and mixed-use sites. We've actually seen residential, old shopping strips, a church, and an RV park brought up for redevelopment or brought up for rezoning into data centers here in Northern Virginia. Electric infrastructure brought in to serve new data center sites can also lead to land speculation for data centers and also electric generation development. It's important to remember that transmission line right-of-way can be acquired through the use of eminent domain, and the locality has no way of dictating where it goes, where it's routed. And generally, complementary uses tend to be energy generation, industrial, and office flex for all those reasons. Incompatible uses tend to be residential, mixed use, commercial, tourism, and agriculture. Lighting. Lighting at a data center should be treated like any other facility. Loudoun County has done a pretty good job with this. Cut off, fully shielded, downward facing lighting should be able to meet the data center security needs without a problem. A security guard came up to me at both of these sites while I was taking these pictures. So the lighting was obviously adequate to see that there was some crazy lady running around in the middle of the night taking pictures. When these data centers are proposed in towns and suburban areas, the building design and massing tends to be at the forefront of people's minds for understandable reasons. Most of the proposals for data centers that we're seeing are hyperscale, and the buildings are larger than even the largest Walmart supercenter. How do you transition that scale down to the pedestrian scale of the surrounding environment? First, I wouldn't discourage this close proximity to residential, mixed use, and commercial for a variety of reasons, which we'll talk more about in a sec. But if a locality is going to do it or wants the data center to fit better into a flex office area, some other things to think about are including height limits, FAR, building footprint limits, and keep in mind that this also affects your power usage as well. The larger the data center, the more servers fit into it, the more power they're going to require. This means more substations, more transmission lines, and more power generation. Encourage different architectural elements to break up the monolithic appearance of the primary facade, such as building step backs or projections, recesses, fenestration, or simulated windows, differentiated surfaces, and materials. Use screening and site layout to ensure that mechanical and storage facilities are not visible from the primary facade. And finally, roof parapets, equipment penthouses, or other visually solid screens could be used to screen rooftop equipment. And this also helps with noise as well. Next, we're going to talk about backup generators and cooling systems and how that impacts air quality, noise, water consumption, and water quality. This is a diagram showing a typical hyperscale data center's flow of power from the grid to the data center. To ensure reliability, most hyperscale data centers ensure two power feeds, shown here by the two transmission lines coming into the substation. The substation then converts the power to usable voltage carried to the data center through underground distribution lines. Due to the amount of power they are using, most hyperscale data centers have their own substations on site, and the distribution lines run to an automatic transfer switch, ATS, which automatically transfers the power supply when its primary power source to a backup source goes out. So, which automatically transfers a power supply from its primary source to a backup power source when there's a failure or outage of the primary source. The backup source is the yellow boxes behind the ATS. Those are your backup generators. The vast majority of generators used by data centers are tier 2 diesel generators. It varies, but most data centers have enough backup power capacity to handle about 3 times their IT load. The ATS then sends the power to two main things, the cooling equipment and the IT load. The IT load includes your UPS, your PDU, and the equipment, which is like your racks, your servers, data storage, switches, routers, that sort of thing. The cooling system usually makes up about 30 to 50% of the total power load, and the IT load makes up about 40 to 60%. A small portion then goes into things like lighting and powering for office spaces. Sorry. A small note about energy efficiency. The industry uses PUE, which is which takes your total facility power divided by the IT equipment power. But for our communities, the numerator at the top of this equation is what matters. Because that is what determines how much electrical infrastructure is going to be needed. So very often data centers will say, hey, we're really energy efficient, but what really matters as planners is actually that total facility power. Hyperscale data centers use dozens of those commercial generators I mentioned as their backup power source to the facility. These generators are usually diesel, but can be natural gas or biodiesel. And these images are meant to just provide scale. These are not the type of whole house generator that you can just go pick up at Home Depot. These are the size of a train car and cost as much as a house. The black cover being lowered on top of this is called the enclosure, which protects it from weather, but also helps reduce sound and provides extra safety around it. Each data center building usually has a dozen or so of these generators. The regulations for emissions from generators are set by the EPA and Virginia DEQ. So Tier 1 was first set the emission standards. Tier 2 was adopted in 1999 and upgraded those standards. Tier 3 upgraded them again in 2006 and 2008, and Tier 4 was implemented in 2008 through 2015, and it mandated reduction of sulfur content and 90% reduction of PM and NOx emissions. And the tier 4 final uses the best emissions reduction technology available. Now, the way that DEQ sets their standards is based on those EPA standards. So they require emergency generators, which they consider to be tier 1 through 3, but the vast majority are tier 2, to use low sulfur diesel fuel oil, good operating practices, and perform appropriate maintenance, and that the emission limit must be set or equal to 6 grams per brake horsepower hour. Now, non-emergency generators, which are tier 4, must use low sulfur fuel as well, but they also meet emission limits of 0.6 grams per brake horsepower hour, and they include diesel particulate filters, diesel oxidation catalysts, and open or closed selective catalytic reduction systems. So how do data center companies decide what generator to use? Here's a decision tree that's provided by Kohler on their website. The first question is, what is it for? Emergency backup or primary power? And then the next question is about the local regulations. Does your regional jurisdiction stipulate special emission requirements? And then finally, organizational choice. Are there internal policies or company values that encourage you to reduce emissions? No. If not, if the answer to those questions is no, then tier 2 is probably sufficient. So what has been the result in Virginia of this? There are over 4,000 data center diesel generators permitted in Loudoun County. The vast majority were permitted as tier 2 for emergency backup. This is a map of all the permits and the number of generators in each permit in the northern portion of Data Center Alley. Note the large circle shows over 200 generators in those permits. And note that the Washington and Old Dominion bike trail is the green line that goes through the middle of all of this. The purple is census box, indicating low-income communities. The reality of what this looks like on the ground is massive data centers with hundreds of generators next to parks, homes, trails, and schools. This Amazon data center on Smith Switch Road in Ashburn is next to Hampshire Park, used for lacrosse and soccer, townhouses, the Washington and Old Dominion Trail, Ashby Ponds, senior living facility. When reviewing data center applications, consider limiting the number or location of these tier 2 diesel generators. I'm sure most of you have heard about noise issues at data centers. Noise that disturbs adjacent properties usually comes from 2 main sources: cooling equipment and generators. Noise created by cooling equipment, primarily air conditioning compressors mounted on rooftop or ground, can be fairly loud. Data center cooling equipment can produce both broadband and low frequency noise. Exposure to that kind of noise, even in low frequency tones, can lead to mental and physical health harm, such as elevated stress hormones, sleep disorders, high blood pressure, and emotional changes. Generators can be very loud, but they only run periodically for maintenance or during emergency power outage. So although we have not seen cryptocurrency data centers in Virginia, another point to consider is that these facilities are often built very cheaply and with less investment into things like security, disaster resilience, sustainability, and they don't care about their reputation as much. So the results of that are cheaper and less sophisticated construction. So often that means less noise mitigation. So there's many examples of communities dealing with noisy cryptocurrency mining data centers all over the US. So a few thoughts for mitigating data center noise. First, avoid allowing data centers in close proximity to residential development. Require noise studies up front at the rezoning or special use stage permit rather than going through costly battle to enforce the ordinance. Recognize that some cooling systems are quieter than others and ask the applicant generally what type of cooling system they will be using. Just so you know, most companies list that kind of information on their website. So that's not proprietary information. They brag about their different types of cooling systems. Liquid cooling is not only energy efficient, but it's also much quieter because it eliminates fans. So take that into consideration. Require generator maintenance to be done during waking hours and not on weekends. And finally, consider only allowing cryptocurrency data centers to run during the daytime hours, because unlike other data centers, they don't have to be running 24/7. So they're different. It's a different model. So I was just referring to cooling systems. Let's go ahead and talk about those briefly. Generally, there are three main types of cooling systems. Two types, I'm sorry, air and fluid cooling, or liquid cooling, I'm sorry, air and liquid cooling. You may have heard about water. You may have heard about how much water data centers can consume. A single data center can use between 1 million and 5 million gallons of water per day. That's as much as a town of 10 to 50,000 people. This diagram shows a typical air-cooled data center and demonstrates why they consume so much power. As you can see, the air-cooled system still uses a water-cooled chiller in cooling towers, which result in significant water loss through evaporation. So this method is very energy efficient, but it is also very water consumptive. There are two main, I just told you there's two types of cooling systems. There's the crack system, which is basically the industrial scale version of your home air conditioning. But that's a very energy intensive way to cool a hyperscale data center. And then there's the crawl system, which is more energy efficient, but it uses cooling towers to remove the heat, as we just saw in that previous diagram, which is much more water consumptive. There's closed loop cooling, such as air-cooled chillers and I always mispronounce this, adiabatic cooling, which can use much less water. And then liquid cooling is becoming more popular as well, which is when the first loop of the heat transfer is actually done by a liquid rather than air. So these include liquid immersion or direct to chip. And then there's hybrid cooling, which moves the liquid closer to the units by putting it like in the row or in the back rear door, but not touching the units. Other industry solutions to reducing water consumption include free cooling or partial free cooling using air or water side economizers, which use naturally cool air and water to cool the data center when it's available. Rainwater harvesting to support water use of the cooling system. Bleed recovery using reverse osmosis to treat the water blowdown from evaporative cooling systems. And finally, trigeneration using gas turbines and gas engines in absorption chillers, which creates electricity, heating, and cooling as byproducts of the combustion process. Finally, the design configuration of the room is also a part of the cooling system, and that includes like room, row, rack, or hybrid of those in the cooling design. Other features include raised floors, hot and cold aisles, and use of blanking panels. But that is a lot of technical stuff, I know. What you need to think about is water usage. Evaporative cooling towers can use a lot of water and are often only a sustainable, evaporative cooling towers can use a lot of water, but they're only a sustainable choice when there's gray water available. Often are only a sustainable choice. Energy usage is another thing you have to consider, which is air cooling without evaporative cooling, and that can use more energy though. And then your noise, you have to think about the use and location of your HVAC equipment and require noise studies up front. Blowdown, you got to think about the capacity of your wastewater treatment facility to handle the amount and concentration of the projected blowdown from the evaporative cooling systems. And then water vapor plumes. Cooling towers can create these plumes. They're harmless, but they can be unsightly and create public concern. And then trigeneration, that's an additional community impact. It's basically an on-site natural gas plant. So you have to consider what are all the impacts of that. The best way to understand these impacts is to have a basic idea of what type of cooling system the proposed data center is going to use. Next, I just want to quickly go over fire protection and fuel storage. Data centers require unique fire protection that localities may not be familiar with. So you also have to consider the large amount of fuel that they have on site as well. So in terms of fire protection, localities will likely need additional training for first responders if the data center, especially if the data center is going to include lithium ion batteries in their UPSs. Loudoun County Combined Fire and Rescue System has developed a data center emergency response manual that could be used for reference and to give you an idea of some of the things to take into consideration. But the important thing to keep in mind is that there's thermal runaway, which can happen with these lithium ion batteries. It creates heat faster than the battery can dissipate it, and it causes a cascading effect, which sometimes necessitates the fire department response, and they have to come in and make sure that it's extinguished. When the fire department responds, there's physical access issues. Getting into the data center can be a problem, especially at the entry gate, for example. That might limit long vehicles like ladder trucks, and then security policies may delay the response. And also you need to have someone, because these data centers are huge and they don't have signs telling you like, here's the UPS, system. So you need to have someone to either bring them around, or you have to have training ahead of time so that you know where you need to be going. The locality also may need to have additional equipment. You might need to have training for inspectors to make sure that these data centers are complying with the best safety measures, and then proper fire protection and fighting systems in place, not just at the data center, but also at the fuel storage yard. In terms of the fuel storage, you want to think about what type of storage: above ground, underground. Above ground generally is safer for detecting and preventing leaks. And then bulk storage needs to be separated from the generators. Obviously, we don't want them to explode. And then fuel storage containers should have secondary containment and overfill protections to prevent fuel from getting into the surrounding environment. And for that same reason, you need to make sure there's no stormwater drains near the refilling stations that could be going into your water systems. And finally, we need to be aware of a push towards on-site power generation. Due to the strain on the grid due to skyrocketing demand that I mentioned earlier from data centers, we are seeing more interest in on-site power generation as a way of bringing projects to market faster. The end of the quote from Charles Yudd that I mentioned earlier at the beginning of this presentation, the second part, he states, "We see high demand users contemplating small nuclear reactors, things that might need to be incorporated into business systems. Recent proposals for on-site power generation in Surrey County for nuclear to hydrogen and West Virginia for a natural gas to hydrogen indicate this is indeed being contemplated, at least in rural locations." As planners, we need to ensure that our definitions for data centers and associated infrastructure take this trend into account and don't allow secondary natural gas plants or nuclear facilities unintentionally. But on the other hand, we also have to be careful with how we word that so that we don't prohibit this, which is a data center in New Jersey that is covered in rooftop solar panels. And although this only provides a small fraction of their energy, it is a fraction of that energy. And it's very important that we meet that demand where it is and try to minimize the impact beyond. There's also a range of approaches throughout the country and of how to apply use-specific standards. Here in Virginia, the largest data center market in the world, I would urge us to be on the cutting edge. We should be the ones leading the charge on this. So some suggestions, just define data centers, cryptocurrency, maybe those things should actually be separated. In any type of on-site power generation. Adopt use-specific standards, require basic information on data center type and cooling system, projected energy, water usage, building design, site layout, which should include substations, generators, fuel storage, and containment areas, and noise studies. There's no perfect model that I could find out there to point to, But some of the ones that you could take a look at that I think are worth reviewing are the ones in Virginia, Loudoun County, Prince William, Prince George, town of Leesburg just adopted one. There's also an interesting one in New York. Niagara Falls has this high energy usage overlay district. Frederick, Maryland has an ordinance. Pitt County, North Carolina has an interesting ordinance. But these ordinance, and also Chandler, Arizona, has one that they adopted after significant noise issues, which you can tell by the ordinance that that's what they were dealing with. Also, just last suggestions here and final thoughts. Don't sign NDAs. It really hurts your relationship with the community when they find out that elected officials, especially, but even the planners have signed these NDAs. And review FOIA regulations and what is considered proprietary information. A lot of data centers come in and say everything's proprietary. You can't even say we're the end user. A general concept plan with buildings, locations, anticipated power usage, generator yard, fuel storage, substation, etc., and basic descriptions of the type of data center and cooling is not proprietary info. You can find that information all over the web. Meet with your utility to discuss electrical infrastructure required during the review process, not after the approval. This requires full information, though, such as the projected megawatts of the data center, which you should be you should be able to get that as a part of the application. And planned location of the substations. Again, that should be part of the location. Part of the site plan, or not site plan, I'm sorry, the general concept plan. And although DEQ oversees the air permitting of generators, we believe to protect the public health, safety, and welfare, localities can adopt and should adopt local regulations on the number or locations of these diesel generators in proximity to sensitive uses like schools, parks, trails, elderly living facilities, hospitals, etc. And this is just a list of lots of additional information if you want to learn more. I also encourage you to check out our PEC webpage, again, if you want to understand more about what we are concerned about as the threat to Virginia overall of this spiking energy demand. And also, I'll just point to the PJM TAC committee. I think that's one that everyone should be paying a little bit of attention to, because these transmission lines are coming from West Virginia, Maryland, Pennsylvania, and they're going all throughout Virginia. So they may be going through your locality, even if you don't have a data center in your locality. And with that, I'll go ahead and open it up to questions.
Thank you, Julie. So it looks like we have a few questions in the Q&A feature. If you want to maybe prioritize some that were not covered.
Let me see here. Why not support small modular nuclear over land-eating solar? I'm not sure how to answer that one, truthfully. Every different energy source has its own impact, so I'm not going to take a position on one over the other, but I do get your point. Any state or federal, sorry, it's moving. Any state or federal level regulations in Virginia driving end users to go solar or wind on certain dates? Treated in zoning regulations. There's nothing requiring, if you're talking about adoption by data centers, there's nothing requiring data centers to adopt renewable energy on site. It is something that's usually encouraged, but not required. Not sure I'm understanding the next one here from Mike Hawkins. Let's see. Oh, okay. Co-locate. I see. Could they be required to co-locate with renewable power generation? Honestly, you're already seeing them co-locate with power generation because they're trying to get closer to the use so that they can get online faster. So I don't know that it's necessary to go requiring it. And I honestly not sure what the benefit necessarily would be for the community. But it's a good question for conversation. And given that they need to be cold, why are data centers being built here and not further north? Actually, they consider Virginia to be fairly cool. in comparison to like Florida and Georgia. So they actually like it here because of our climate, is what I've heard. And yes, cheap electricity is definitely an important aspect. And yes, access to those transatlantic cables. Why does DEQ specify that tier 4 generators are not for emergency use? It's because they're matching it up with the EPA regulations. So they're applying the EPA regulations within their code, and that's how they've done it. So I think it actually kind of goes back to the EPA. Has the impact of high transmission power lines that serve data centers come up as an impact for data centers? I mean, yes, I think that is a crucial impact of the data centers. And I think that's one that as planners, we have to be considering every time we approve a data center, which is why we need to know more about what we're approving. Have decommissioned power plants been considered as locations for large data centers? Yes, actually, there's one. Oh God, where is it? Is it the one in West Virginia? I think it might be the one in West Virginia. I mean, it gives them access to the power grid. I'm not sure what difference it necessarily makes for us, but yes, they are being considered. They are attractive because they already have the infrastructure in place, and the grid has the capability of handling additional power, especially if you're going to have on-site power generation. Are you aware of any reasonable alternatives to diesel for backup generators that data centers are using? Yes and no. So answer to that is the tier 4 generators are much higher. They have much better controls in them and reduce the pollutants going into the environment. So I would advocate for tier 4 generators. The problem is that those generators are typically seen as non-emergency, so they can be run for, not typically, they are by law required, they're considered non-emergency generators. So they are allowed to run for, what do they call it? They can peak shave, that's what it's called, peak shaving. They can run to supplement power to the grid. So there is some concern that if we were to advocate for tier 4 generators, that we would have more generators running for longer periods of time, and that might make it might be worse than the impact of the tier 2 generators. That's one of the arguments that I have heard from DEQ staff. My argument back to that is that the grid is getting stressed, and that it's more likely that we're going to see these emergency generators running for longer periods of time anyway. So I would say getting them into tier 4 status now is probably better, because we're going to be stressed. The grid is already being stressed. We're going to have to deal with this pollution anyway. So let's go ahead and start converting them to tier 4. And just let me add on to that. You actually can, not all generators, but some tier 2 generators can be retrofitted with some of those capture technologies, like the dock, the catalytic converters. All those things actually can be integrated into the tier 2 and can sometimes upgrade them to the tier 4 level. It takes a little bit of gerrymandering, but you can, not gerrymandering, it's probably not the word, anyways, but it takes a MacGyvering, let's call it MacGyvering. But you can actually do that, is what I understand. So there's that possibility. The other thing is there's natural gas generators. That comes with its own downside, though, of potentially having to have more natural gas pipelines. So I don't have a silver bullet solution, and that's why I say regulate the location and the number of these generators, and then let the industry figure out where they want to try to, how they want to deal with that. Do they want to try to come up with better solutions? Oh no, I don't see any other questions. That was it, I think. Thank you. I see that Alex said, great presentation. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Julie. We really appreciate you fitting all of your knowledge into the hour and for answering all these questions. All attendees, there will be a follow-up email going out in the coming days, which will also have Julie's contact information if you have any questions that you think of or were not able to ask. And there will also be a link to the recording and the slide decks. So all this information will be available to you. But thank you so much, Julie. It was an incredibly informative presentation, and we really appreciate your contribution to the series.
I appreciate you having me. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Keep your eyes peeled on your inboxes for the follow-up email. Have a good rest of your afternoon.
Bye, guys.